therapist and graduate of Dominion Herbal College. She is the owner of Healing House Natural Wellness Center and also used to work in Finlandia, a naturopathic clinic here in Vancouver. Petra is an active member of Herbalists Without Borders International and directs the Herbal Without Borders chapter and Free People's Clinic for Vancouver. Additionally, she is a primary contributor for Home Herbalist magazine in both the US and Canada, and writing the monthly Ask a Herbalist article, which allows readers to have their health answers questions answered by a clinical herbalist. Petra is passionate about promoting an individual's healing path and enjoys enriching a person's core wellness with the use of herbs and nutrition. She believes that health and healing should not be something afforded solely to those with the financial means to seek help, but rather that the knowledge of taking responsibility for one's own health is a basic human right. Apart from clinic and teaching, Petra is an avid gardener and sustainable small-scale food producer. She enjoys teaching out of her gardens at the Healing House and finds great meaning in sharing the message of sustainability with others. She's passionate about heritage, edible plants, and domestic history, and she believes hold the solutions for the modern food crisis. Petra is also an instructor here at the Vancouver campus. She teaches nutrition and the environment. And I can say from my personal experience in working with her, she is absolutely a passionate woman who walks the walk and talks the talk. And I know the students feel the same way. So I'm really excited for her to share some of that knowledge with you today. She's going to be lecturing on the gut microbiome and mental health. And Petra, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Oh, well, thank you. And good morning, Jason, and good morning to everybody. We're going to talk a lot about the gut microbiome, or rather the bacterial colonies that are living in your gut and how individual they are and what that means in regard to mental health. We're also going to talk a little bit about anatomy, because I think that's really important to understand sort of what your digestive tract looks like and how it works. And we're then also going to talk about the different ways that we can create dysbiosis in our guts. So through our daily habits, through diet, through packaging even, and things like that. So we'll go fairly deep, and I'll try to keep it within the hour. I'm sure Jason will stop me if I go over. And let's see, I'm gonna try to share my screen here. Okay. And we'll go full screen. All right, I imagine that everyone can see this. So we're going to talk about the gut microbiome and mental health. And I don't know how to get that to go away, but we'll just tuck it out of the way. So here's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about a brief visit of the anatomy of the digestive tract, but specifically, I want to talk about where all those beautiful bacteria live in your gut. We're going to talk about what a microbiome is, why it's important. We're going to talk about a concept called gut and psychology syndrome. We're going to talk about the microbes that live in your gut and the roles they play, how they affect your mental health, some of the neurotransmitters and hormones that they produce, and then some of the ways that we unintentionally harm our microbiome through diet, environmental exposure, and some of the drugs, both prescription and over the counter. We'll also talk about ways that you can holistically assist your microbiome through herbs, diets, and I'm going to visit a few supplements as well. So hold on to your hats. We got a lot to get through. If you have any questions, just go ahead and write them down, stick them in chat, and I'm sure Jason will grab them at the end. And I welcome questions, either microbiome, herbal, supplement, dietary, just throw them my way. Okay, here we go. So, the anatomy of the gut, or our digestive tract. There's a lot going on. To say without much dignity, we are kind of this beautiful fleshy sack of tissue, and we've got our digestive tract, which we have an in and an out, and we're all familiar with it. But we've got some really important parts going on here. So our digestion and our digestive tract and our guts is where we receive our nutrition. The understanding that digestion partially happens in the stomach, it happens partially in the mouth when we're macerating, chewing our food, But the portion where we're getting all of our nutrition and absorbing all of our nutrients is actually happening in our small intestine predominantly, and also in the large intestine where you're getting your fluids and liquids. And this is happening in the lining of your gut, in the villi. You see a picture on the left-hand side. And this is where all the action and consequently where all the trouble happens. The villi kind of looks like this little fanny thing. And if you were to look really up close and to take a side cut of it, you would see that it looks like these little fleshy tendrils. And these little fleshy tendrils are lined, you can see the green line at the very top there, with epithelial cells. And these epithelial cells are connected to the tissue underneath, which is circulatory capillaries, so that the food, the molecules and whatnot that's coming in from your food is being absorbed into your cardiovascular, into your blood, so it can go where it needs to go. It also has venal supply, so taking blood out that doesn't need to be there, and also lymphatic tissue is there. So lymph, part of your detoxification, which is so important to have clean detoxification if you want full nutrients. And this is also in the villi of the gut, from start to finish. This is where your bacterial colonies are living. And they line your gut, they line the mucosal membrane, and that's where all the action and all the trouble happens as well. So for example, if we have inflammation in the gut, this is where it's going to appear, right on that villi, on the mucosal membrane. So when we have things like inflammation, if we have ulcers and such in the gut, it is directly, it's directly having implications on how we are able to absorb our food, which can then lead to deficiencies, which can then further lead to different types of diseases, not only just inflammatory-based diseases, which can occur through long-term inflammation, but from diseases that come through deficiency. Other parts that are super important is our liver. So you can see a cross-section of the liver in the bubble. I wish I had a pointer. I don't have a pointer when I have a prism. Oh, I do. Here, liver. Look at that. So here's your liver cross-section. Here's the whole. Here's your aortic supply and your venal supply, and the green is your bile. And you've got your spleen here, which is super important. This is your largest lymphatic vessel in the entire body. And you also have your stomach over here. So this is where things are being broken down. Proteins and fibers are being broken down so that they can enter the duodenum. Right here, your first curve. And you can see sort of this wrinkly structure. And you see this little wavy thing here. This is a representation of the villi that we were just talking about, and also where all your microbes are living. Okay? And your gallbladder, super important, stores your bile, which helps to further break down proteins in digestion. And your abdominal lymph nodes, which are these little dots here. You have lymph nodes throughout your whole body. They're part of your detoxification system. But you'll also learn here that the microbes, your biome, plays a super important role in making sure your liver is working well, and making sure the bile is working well, that the spleen is well supported, that your lymphatic vessels are able to fully pull lymphatic liquid from your tissues. They're all connected through the microbiome. So what is a microbiome? The microbiome is your personal bacterial colony, and it's yours. It's no one else's. And it's very interesting because we get our microbiome from our mother, and she gets her microbiome from her mother, and so forth and so forth and so forth. So you have the entire length of your lineage, basically, in your gut. And as you grow and as you experience things, these colonies, of course, change, and they become your own, your pathological microbiome. So we also have microbiomes in other places in our body. So we're kind of like mini versions of the earth. We have, of course, the microbiome in our gut. We have a microbiome on our skin. We have our own type of biome in our hair, in our eyebrows, in our mouth. They're everywhere, and they vary from where they are in the body. However, the largest microbiome, the largest colony, is in our digestive tract. And the average adult carries about 1.5 to 2 kilograms of bacteria in the gut. And these bacterial colonies are not in any way chaotic. They're not just floating around like you see on the screen there, but they're actually organized, and they're organized into colonies, and they're symbiotic, meaning they can't live without the other. It's sort of like if I were to compare our microbiome to anything else, it would be the soil. So there's millions and billions and trillions of actually bacteria living in the soil, and they're all symbiotic. Same thing with our gut. There's also a tremendous number of functions for our microbiome, which we'll talk about specifically. But they're so important to us that if our gut were to become sterilized, or if we were to have some sort of gut injury where the microbiome was wiped out, it's very likely we would not survive because of those key performance items that our microbiome does for us. So we're also going to talk, because we're talking about mental health, I have to talk about gut and psychology syndrome. And gut and psychology syndrome is fairly new. And it is a term pegged by Dr. Natasha Campbell McBride, who's an MD. She's also a doctor of neurology and has a Master of Science in Nutrition. She wrote a book called Gut and Psychology Syndrome, which she calls GAPS, which is the short version. And in this book, she talks about how gut dysbiosis in infants can turn into mental disorders in older children, but in adults as well. And she also talks about how the microbes in the microbiome produce various vitamins. You're going to also learn in the talk how they produce neurotransmitters and hormones. So because they do all these things that are absolutely crucial and related to mental health, it becomes quite obvious when you can take a step back that of course these bacteria and these pathological microbes are going to have an impact on mental health irregularities. So knowing this, we can think, okay, well, what diseases can be tied to gut irregularities? Now, science is hot on the heels of this, but depression, anxiety, ADD and ADHD, issues with autism, learning disorders like dyslexia and dyspraxia, and also schizophrenia. And I'll talk about a case study. I can talk about a couple case studies that I've encountered in regards to schizophrenia and also issues with depression and anxiety, which I'll talk about later. But in these two cases, both of these individuals were on a slew of medications, so that limits me to what herbs I can use, but that doesn't limit me on what I can do with supplements and diet. And both individuals had huge positive responses because their gut was treated. This leads to understanding that all parts of the body are connected. Okay, so in modern science, we're very good at compartmentalizing our different systems. Modern medicine has divided the human being into lots of different systems: our cardiovascular system, our digestive system, our nervous system. And according to this division, different medical specialties have been created, each concentrating on a part of the human body. Of course, because one doctor can't know everything, and one holistic practitioner can't know everything. So they're compartmentalized into cardiology, gastroenterology, gynecology, neurology, psychiatry, and so forth. Okay. And so it's just because of the tremendous concentration of knowledge that we have to do this. However, as holistic practitioners, such as yourselves, future holistic practitioners, you will learn at IHN and whatever other paths that you choose to proceed through in holistic nutrition, that the body is fully connected. And so when we look at issues of mental health, if we look at issues of the gut, we try to look at all the other systems and how they are connected. So the fact that everything is connected, and that everything functions as a whole, we can then start deducting what the problem might be. And one area of modern medicine that is particularly prone to look at organs separately of the body is the area of psychiatry. Mental irregularities are often examined from all sorts of angles. They'll look at genetics, childhood experiences, and psychological influences. And one of the last things that they'll look at are the digestive system. So let's talk about what's in our guts. We're going to explore the makeup of the microbiome. And there are thousands of microbes, possibly hundreds of thousands, millions of different types of microbes. Science hasn't finished figuring out what everything is. This is new studies. But we have grouped them into 3 different groups based on what they do and how they function and how they can impede or help our health. So group 1 is our essential or beneficial flora. This is your own physiological flora. This is what lives in your gut that you're born with. And this is your most important group and the most numerous in a healthy individual. So these bacteria are often referred to as your indigenous friendly bacteria, as I said a moment ago, the bacteria that you're born with. And the main members of this group, although this is not inclusive, again, science continues to look into this and continues to map out the microbiome. But this is bifidobacteria, lactobacteria, proprionobacteria, and physiological strains of E. coli, peptostreptococci, and enterococci. And E. coli, funny enough, we've all heard of this bacterium. We've all heard of E. coli because we've heard of E. coli poisoning, and we're very familiar with food poisoning from the media and just how dangerous E. coli can be. However, each of us are born with our own physiological E. coli. And this physiological E. coli is kept under wraps by the other members of our microbiome. But this physiological E. coli plays some really, really important roles in vitamin production, specifically in vitamins that help alter and maintain mood and feelings of well-being, which I will get into when we talk about the different functions. So group 2 is a group called Opportunistic flora. And the most well-known opportunistic flora that we see as practitioners is going to be our good friend Candida albicans, white yeast. This is an invasive opportunistic flora that naturally lives in our body. When we have a dysbiosis or an imbalance, or if we're eating lots of sugars, lots of gluten, lots of processed foods, Candida albicans has a rip-roaring rave party in your gut and goes completely out of control, which can then later lead to systemic issues. But I'm not just going to talk about Candida. I will talk about all opportunistic flora. This is a large group of various microbes, and the number and combinations can be completely individual. And these are bacteria, bacteroids, peptococci, staphylococci. We've all heard of staph, right? Staph infections, streptococci, strep infections, bacilli, clostridia, part of our lovely food poisoning issues, yeast, enterobacteria. I'm sure we've heard of H. pylori, that's a type of enterobacteria, fusobacteria, and eubacteria, and catinobacteria. So some of the really rotten ones that we encounter in our day-to-day is, of course, the staphylococci, streptococci, the clostridia, the yeast, and the enterobacteria. And there are around 500 different varieties and different various species of these opportunistic microbes known to science. We don't know them all yet. Again, we haven't finished mapping out the microbiome. And in a healthy person, the numbers are limited and tightly controlled by our beneficial flora, not Florida. We're not going on vacation, we're stuck in a pandemic. But the beneficial flora keep it under control, because what is happening is certain beneficial flora are feeding off of opportunistic flora, so there's a balance. And on their own, each of these microbes are capable of causing various health problems. But again, because they're in control under a healthy microbiome, they're in balance and doing what they're supposed to do. Then we have transitional flora. This is the flora that we come into contact every day. You eat a burger, you're having transitional flora. You have a kale salad, transitional flora. You eat a bit of dirt, transitional flora. So these various microbes, which we swallow daily with our food and drink, and we encounter them in the environment. Touching a counter and then chewing your nails, transitional flora. Plus maybe a few microbes or, you know, upper respiratory infections. But yeah, wash your hands. Anyways, when the gut is well protected by beneficial bacteria, this group of microbes goes through our digestive tract without doing us any harm. But if our population of beneficial flora is damaged and not functioning well, this group of microbes can cause disease. There's one particular one that is quite nasty, and a huge amount of the population has it, doesn't even know it. And this is Helicobacter pylori, H. pylori, which is, science doesn't yet know how we fully get infected by it, what the transmission is. There's a whole bunch of theories on that. But what I will say is this transitional flora, this out of control bacteria, is highly inflammatory, and it has now been designated as our first carcinogenic bacteria. So it is a bacteria known to cause cancer, and it causes cancer by causing the inflammatory cycle. We're going to talk about the inflammatory cycle as long as I don't run out of time. I think I'm doing fairly well. So how does the microbiome affect mental health? So this is not in any way a complete list of how it affects mental health. These are 3 of my favorites, and these are 3 of what I feel are very important to understand. But there are other ways, and we can talk about those briefly as well. But back to physiological E. coli. So the E. coli that is part of your beneficial microbiome that you're born with, your indigenous microbiome, has a very important role. It helps produce vitamin K2 and your vitamins B1, B2, B6, and B12. They also produce an antibiotic-like substance called colicin. So when you have your healthy physiological E. coli, you're then able to make your B vitamins, which helps control mood. Also, B vitamins are the energy centers for every single cell in our body, and really is very important with all of our metabolic functions. So if we have good vitamin B, we have good physiological E. coli. So if someone, for example, comes to see me at Healing House and they want to explore natural options, natural support options for depression, anxiety, I'm going to immediately look at the gut. We're going to immediately talk about probiotics, vitamin B, and changes in foods, because someone who is having issues with depression oftentimes in lab studies has shown to have low B complex vitamins. And that could be either because of food deficiency or a microbiome dysbiosis. So you could be having an issue with your physiological E. coli. They also control members of their own family, which can cause illness and disease. So your private E. coli group is out there protecting you, and we can damage our physiological E. coli through all types of environmental factors, types of food choices, medications, stress, and so forth, which we'll talk about in a moment. The next thing I'd like to talk about is something called the vagus nerve. And the vagus nerve is a cranial nerve. It's nerve number 10. You have 12 of them in your head. And it is a very important nerve. It is your superhighway, and it spans throughout your entire body. But very importantly, it has a huge branch in the gut. And the number of nerves in your gut outnumbers those in your spinal cord. So, a couple things that the vagus nerve does is it helps control digestion, helps control motility, and it helps talk to your liver. It helps connect your mouth to your liver. I'm not making this up. So, either in herbal medicine, we have something called the bitter factor or the bitter principle. So when we eat bitter foods, so chicory is a bitter food, certain types of greens are bitter foods, radicchio is an excellent bitter food. That bitter principle has a very special relationship with your vagal nerve, which is back here at the back of your throat. And that sort of bitter feeling that you're getting is is impacting the vagal nerve, and the vagal nerve is sending a direct message to your liver, and it's saying, release the bile, we're gonna eat some food. So when the bile is released, it does a few things. It helps aid in digestion, which means that your microbiome is able to do what it's doing because it's not having to further break down food. Your stomach is breaking down the food. It's also able to break down proteins, and it also helps reduce issues with inflammatory digestive problems. So it's really important. And also your microbiome, the fact that it's living on the lining of your gut and your vagal nerve, your nerve endings are all throughout the gut, means that your bacteria are intimately speaking to your nervous system with neurotransmitters and hormones. And that's a really big deal because your brain and your gut are sending messages back and forth, okay, along that vagal nerve and other parts of the nervous system. The other way that the microbiome can affect mental health is through inflammation. Now, inflammation is a nasty, nasty thing, and inflammation can also be silent. So it's estimated that around 80 to 85% of our immunity is located on the gut wall, which of course would have to be because that's where your biome lives. And when we are immunocompromised, our body cannot react appropriately to various environmental stressors. So we may become inflamed. Chronic inflammation has been tied to many diseases and mental health issues. But let's break this down just a little bit. Let's talk about inflammation. Inflammation in and of itself is actually our body's way of protecting us from injury. You sprain your ankle and your body has an inflammatory response. This is your body's way of saying, oh, we need some fluids in here, we need some blood in here, we need lymph moving so we can get this injury taken care of. And so it inflames, it puffs up like a pufferfish to protect its site of injury. Now, when we have chronic inflammation, this creates the inflammatory cycle. And when we have the inflammatory cycle, things start breaking down quite quickly. And we get stressor hormones, we get breakdown in other systems as well. So if we're talking about inflammation in the gut, let's say there's an issue with IBS, irritable bowel syndrome. You have inflammation in your gut, you have overactive motility. Motility means the time which it takes for food to break down and then form into feces and exit the body. So when you have high motility, things are exiting very quickly, the body doesn't have a chance to fully absorb the nutrients. So if you have an inflamed digestive tract, you have issues with deficiencies. If you have issues with deficiencies, then you have issues with tissue restoration. If you have issues with tissue restoration, then you have issues with lymph because you have dead or broken or damaged tissue that the lymph can't fully pull lymphatic tissue out of. If you have issues with lymph, then you've got issues with toxic release and so forth. So as you can see, it's all related, all from your gut. So the inflammation can cause issues with mental health, specifically is seen in issues with depression, issues with insomnia, issues with anxiety. We've also seen studies tying inflammation to issues with ADD and ADHD. Also issues with other things like schizophrenia. So, not a nice thing to have. Other things that can be tied to chronic inflammation: cancer, arthritis, Alzheimer's disease, neurological diseases. So not just depression, anxiety, and so forth, but things like Parkinson's, MS are all tied to chronic inflammation. Different cardiovascular diseases, autoimmune diseases, pulmonary diseases, and type 2 diabetes are all connected to chronic inflammation. And I wanted to quickly revisit the beautiful vagal nerve, which is right here, nerve number 10, which is here. If we were to do a cross section of the head, I could go, oh, here's a cross section. So your vagal nerve, one of the branches comes out right at the top of your soft palate. which is where you can taste or where your vagal nerve picks up on the bitter principle and then sends information to your digestive tract. So it's a motor nerve, and it helps control functions of the heart, lungs, bronchi, and gastrointestinal tract. It also helps tell our gastrointestinal tract how to behave with motility. Also helps us with a certain sense of balance, and but most importantly, when it comes to our microbiome, it's speaking to our liver and speaking to the release of bile to help further break down food. So really, really important. And I chose to talk about the vagal nerve so you could see how so many systems are related to our digestive tract. Okay. And if you'd like to see this later, learn all about the 12 cranial nerves, there you go, they're all here for you. And if you ever get into clinical studies where you have to do any type of client exams, learning the 12 cranial nerves is a challenge. So let's talk about some of the neurotransmitters and hormones that our microbiome creates. Holy smokes. So things like serotonin, a huge part of it is created in our gut by our bacterium, by our biome. And serotonin is quite special because it's considered a neurotransmitter and a hormone. It's often called the feel-good hormone. Our gut contains a vast majority of serotonin in our body, and it's often created there and then sent via neurotransmitters to our brain. So serotonin is thought to govern messages of well-being, contentment, satiety, anxiety, and fear throughout the nervous system. So when we are talking about depression, when we're talking about anxiety, when we're talking about feelings of doom and despair, we might safely be talking about a serotonin issue. And if we're talking about a serotonin issue, potentially before we reach for those serotonin uptake drugs, we might want to visit the possibility of gut health. Okay. So serotonin, or 5-HTP, is produced by enterochromatin, or EC cells, lining the digestive tract. Remember that villi that lines your digestive tract? Well, your EC cells are there, creating serotonin. And at this time, it's believed that our gut bacteria can both directly and indirectly influence serotonin levels. In the lab, certain gut bacteria have been shown to produce their own serotonin. Holy smokes. However, they can also interact with the nervous system to alter its production of neurotransmitters. So you have, in other words, bacteria living on your villi, and in your villi, you have EC cells, and the EC cells are talking with the bacteria, which are then also producing their own serotonin. And then your neurotransmitters are picking up on those serotonin and taking them where they need to go, to the brain, right? Thus giving us feelings of well-being, giving us feelings of security, and so forth. Okay, serotonin in the gut. This is one of my favorites. So this is another really important neurotransmitter. This is GABA, or gamma aminobutyric acid. GABA comes into play a lot of times in regards to individuals who suffer with anxiety and depression, but also we see GABA in individuals with ADD and ADHD. So GABA has a big role in the body, and it is to reduce the activity of neurons in the brain and central nervous system, which in turn has a broad range of effects on the body and mind, including increased relaxation because it's reducing the activity, reduced stress, a more calm and balanced mood, alleviation of pain, and boost to sleep. So if you've ever tried to get to sleep and you have a super chatty brain and your brain won't stop, oftentimes you are low on GABA. There's a lot of herbs, thankfully, that have high doses of GABA. One of my favorites is lemon balm. which is a natural way of raising GABA levels. Also, St. John's wort can help with GABA levels. Stachys officinalis or wood betony can help with GABA levels. So GABA is the major inhibitory neurotransmitters of mammals in the central nervous system, and decreased levels are associated with depression and anxiety, and ADHD, and insomnia, and a feeling of overactive mind, okay, and repetitive and controllable thinking. So GABA modulating bacteria may be affecting mental health by consuming or producing this important neurotransmitter. So our bacteria, our design, our gut is very smart. Our bacteria can speak with our nervous system, with our brain. Our brain can potentially say, hey guys, we need more GABA. We've got racing thoughts. Or can say, hey, produce more GABA, and so forth. So, however, if those bacteria are missing or damaged, you're not going to be having the same control of GABA levels than you would in an individual with a healthy microbiome. So GABA is located throughout the GI tract and is found in the enteric nerves as well as in endocrine-like cells, implicating GABA as both a neurotransmitter and an endocrine mediator, influencing GI function. Well, how about that? So GABA is helping the brain, but it's also helping the gut function properly. Now let's talk about dopamine. How am I doing on time? I don't want to talk I don't want to go too over. I forget what time this ends. I'll just keep talking until Jason tells me I'm done. So let's talk about dopamine. This is a neurotransmitter. This is another thing that is a huge, this is another neurotransmitter that is largely created in the gut. About 50% of our dopamine is produced in our gastrointestinal tract by enteric neurons and intestinal epithelial cells. Remember those intestinal epithelial cells? Remember the villi, the fanny villi? And those intestinal epithelial cells are living just right on top. And on top of them is your biome. So your epithelial cells get a lot of workout with your biome. And they're super important. And as we're talking about all of these different types of neurotransmitters and these different types of hormones, we're seeing time and time again that the messenger for these are those intestinal epithelial cells, which are protected by your biome. So the intestinal epithelial cells, there results in higher level of dopamine in the hepatic liver portal. So this is where a lot of those levels are exiting. Okay. So known for its role in arousal and alertness in the waking state, as well as in sensory signal detection. But more recent work has found it is also involved in behavioral and cognition, like memory, learning, and attention. So if 50% of our dopamine is created in our gut, and we have issues with memory, we have issues with learning, maybe we have dyspraxia or dyslexia, there is potential here, because of these studies, that we might want to look at the biome and see what the dopamine levels are doing. If you're able to test for dopamine, I actually don't know if you're able to test for dopamine in the blood. I imagine so. So when it comes to these cognitive or learning behaviors, we might want to look at what's creating the dopamine, which we're going to talk about here in a moment, and know that these bacteria play such an important role, which is so important to just the basic fundamentals of mental health and a quality life. So dopamine is one of the major neurotransmitters in reward-motivated behavior. And it's a precursor for other catecholamines, I can't talk, like norepinephrine and epinephrine. So epinephrine, you're excited about something, or you just ate the best piece of chocolate in the world and it tastes so good. That's dopamine, okay? Or you jump out of a plane and that's the scariest thing in your life, but you really, really enjoyed it. That's epinephrine and dopamine, okay? So there's several bacteria that are shown to produce dopamine and norepinephrine. And look at that. There's our physiological E. coli again. There's Proteus vulgaris. And then there's a couple Bacillus varieties and a Serratia variety. And all of these were found to harbor relatively high levels in their biomass, so in their mass or in their bodies. So, microbiome, dopamine, pretty cool. Thyroid. This was one that really surprised me when I was learning about the potential for mental health and gut health. The thyroid really surprised me because I always thought, okay, well, thyroid comes from your thyroid gland. Well, yes, but we're missing a conversion factor, which actually happens in our gut. So an imbalanced gut microbiome has been associated now with hypothyroidism, meaning low thyroidism, so low levels of thyroid. When your thyroid produces, too little TSH. So symptoms of hypothyroidism include fatigue, depression, and impaired memory. So if I were to see a client that had already been diagnosed by their MD with hypothyroidism and they wanted assistance on this, first and foremost, I'm going to the gut before I look at anything else. I would ask about digestive behavior. I would ask about digestive history and so forth to see if there could be a connection. So studies show that both T4, which is thyroxine, and T3, which is triiodothyronine, woo, try saying that 5 times fast, protect the intestinal lining from ulcers. That's pretty important, hey? Especially if you have inflammation in the gut or a microbiome that's maybe not protecting the villi completely. Studies also show hypothyroidism can cause intestinal permeability issues or leaky gut, which allows undigested food into the bloodstream and instigates an immune attack. So leaky gut is actually a really common and uncomfortable and super negatively impactful digestive issue. So when we talk about leaky gut, we're talking about a breach in the villi of the intestinal tract. We're talking about a place where there might be inflammation or an overabundance of candida or an ulceration or an H. pylori situation that is causing the breakdown of leaky gut. So when we have that, plus we might have an issue with thyroid, we're creating a situation where we can have an immune issue. And these immune attacks oftentimes present themselves in what's sometimes described as spontaneous or unrelatable allergies, meaning these individuals eat something they may or may not have been previously allergic to, and they have an immune attack. So T3 and T4 together help to regulate body temperature, metabolism, and heart rate. 20% of thyroid function depends on a sufficient supply of healthy gut bacteria to convert T4 to T3. When diets are poor and digestion falters, dysbiosis, also known as imbalance, an overabundance of bag bacteria, so different types of Clostridia, different types of Candida, and so forth, crowds out the beneficial bacteria. Doesn't necessarily crowd out, I mean, yes, it crowds out, but it also eats them and destroys them. And it can thus hamper the production of the active thyroid hormone, which protects your gut in the first place, which helps protect against leaky gut, which helps with issues with fatigue, depression, impaired memory, and so forth. So we're seeing this over and over again, all these connective factors. Okay, so those are just 4. Those are just 4 neurotransmitters / hormones that are produced in the gut. There are more. There is a lot more produced in the gut, and science keeps identifying more. So I can't wait to learn and to be able to see what we come up with and what the final say is going to be in regard to microbiome and mental health. I think we're going to all be pleasantly surprised. That's my hunch as science continues to discover more. So let's talk about unintentional ways that we damage our microbiome. This one, the first one is not a surprise. Antibiotics. Okay, we know this. Antibiotics are the most commonly prescribed medication in the world, and they're ingested regularly through prescriptions, but you get them chronically due to modern farming practices. That's a bummer. So, antibiotics kill indiscriminately. They're very, very handy when you have an infection that can't be controlled with natural options, or you have a chronic situation where you need antibiotics. Thank goodness we have them when we need them. However, unfortunately, they're used an exorbitant amount of time. They're often considered one of the most overprescribed drugs. They are fed to farm animals. They are also released to a point through herbicides and pesticides, we'll talk about this briefly, into soil. So when we eat farmed products, we are eating what the animal ate, okay? So if you have beef, and I don't want to say beef, I don't want to say like beef is bad, because beef is fine. I'm just saying if you're having, I'll just say meat, so nobody gets mad at me about saying beef. So if you're eating traditionally or Western farmed meat that are used, that you're using antibiotics on, that the farmer's using antibiotics, you're getting a dose of antibiotics, is what I'm trying to say. And it's not so much that that little tiny bit of antibiotic for that one meal is going to hurt you, but it's if you're eating these types of products multiple times per day, day after day, week after week, year after year, decade after decade, what's going to happen to your microbiome? You're going to have bacteria and your physiological E. coli killed off, because our body, although it's amazing and can handle a lot of things, we have something called the rain barrel effect, meaning our body can only take so much before things spill over the rain barrel. And that's a concept we talk a lot about in nutrition and the environment. So diet is another way we can unintentionally harm ourselves. So the modern diet, I think we can all agree that the Western modern diet is abysmal. It's rich in convenient foods and low in nutrition. The standard Western diet is high in sugar, processed carbohydrates. This feeds fungi. Remember we were talking about candida? This is candida rocket fuel. Candida, when it becomes out of control, creates this awful inflammatory type film, which just attaches itself to the villi, attaches itself throughout the walls of your entire digestive tract. It can potentially do this. And then it becomes gloppy. It destroys other bacteria colonies, and it can then create an inflammatory injury on the wall of the digestive tract, and can lead to issues with food being let into the circulatory system. Mind you, we're talking about microscopic situations, not, there's not corn going through your aorta, so don't worry about that. Can cause issues where the candida itself can get into the blood and then start going to other systems. Systemic candida is a serious health issue. Full-blown systemic candida can also lead to a septic issue. I'm not saying this to scare you. It's not common, these super septic issues. But what is common nowadays is people with chronic candida issues. First thing we want to do is look at the diet and look at that microbiome and see how we can change our habits. So getting rid of those convenience foods, getting rid of those things that are high in sugar, reading your labels, please, and getting rid of those processed carbohydrates that are rocket fuel for so many of the negative and opportunistic fungi living in our digestive tract. The other way we can unintentionally harm ourselves is through herbicides and pesticides. Herbicides and pesticides that are used in standard agriculture. These chemicals come from the byproducts of war. They are reformulations of things like reformulations of Agent Orange, for example, and they're meant to kill microbes that kill our crops. Now, in small doses, again, not harmful to you, but small doses in the apple, in the celery, in the spinach, in the lettuce, in the beets that you're eating 3, 4, or 5 times a day, day after day, year after year, week after week, are going to have an impact on your microbiome and your neurological tract and all kinds of other systems. So we're talking about chronic exposure to chemicals that can alter your gut health. And then lastly, packaging and plastics. A lot of modern plastics and a lot of modern packaging are endocrine disruptors or endocrine imbalancers. Our body treats these chemicals, oh, I can see the questions popping up, treats these chemicals like hormones. For example, there's a type of chemical in plastics that mimics estrogen, also known as xenoestrogen, which mimics which mimics estrogen, and your body treats it like that. However, unfortunately, it's also massively inflammatory, and over estrogenation can lead to all kinds of other issues, let alone gut. But since we're talking about gut health, packaging, and plastic, a lot of these endocrine imbalancers or these chemicals that act like hormones in our body can cause massive gut issues. We're doing on time. I think we're okay. All right, let's talk about some helpers. We talked about the really grim stuff. Let's talk about some of my favorite herbal helpers. These are not by any means meant to be an inclusive list, but Uncaria tomentosa, calendula, and plantago are all amazing herbal helpers. Uncaria tomentosa, also known as cat's paw, is an Amazon basin vine. It is highly anti-inflammatory, highly antimicrobial, antibacterial. It can be used in cases where someone is having a gut dysbiosis caused by an overgrowth of a certain type of bacterium or a fungi. So Calendula officinalis, which is super, super common, is an herb that is specific to issues with candida overgrowth. It also increases cellular granulation. So cellular granulation is a very fancy way of saying cellular healing. It helps injury heal. So on the skin, when you use Calendula officinalis, it can help skin heal from a wound. If you're using it in your gut, it can help your gut become less inflamed, can kill off the candida, and it can speed up the healing process of the gut. Okay. Plantago major, you see this everywhere on the side of the road. It loves to live in high traffic, damp areas. It likes to be stepped on. I don't know why. Plantago majora, also known as plantain or plantain leaf. It's cooling, it's anti-inflammatory, it's a demulcent, which means it soothes the mucosal membrane anywhere in the body. So this includes the mucosal membrane of the eyes, the mouth, the throat, the lungs, and the digestive tract. It's used for any time you have an inflammatory issue of the mucosal membrane. One more commentary about the Uncaria tomentosa. If by chance anyone says, I have a gut issue, I'm going to go self-dose on an herb, please don't do that with Uncaria. It does have contraindications with certain drugs. So please don't try that one on your own. The other two, you're okay to try on your own. All right, let's talk about a couple more helpers in regards to diet. So we talked about standard Western farming practices. We talked about how those chemicals can have an impact. So eating as much as you can of organic or non-medicated meats, okay? So limit your exposure to antibiotics, which are inflammatory, which can kill off your microbiome. This will help protect your gut and will protect you from chronic issues. You don't need to have antibiotics 3 times a day. It's not a wise plan, okay? Also eliminate processed foods and sugars. You're all potentially soon to be experts in nutrition. So this is going to be an obvious one for you. So sugar feeds fungi, fungi causes inflammation, inflammation causes disease. So don't eat it, okay? Also, you're dealing a lot of times with processed foods that have toxic ingredients. A lot of those stabilizers, emulsifiers, coloring agents, flavoring agents are neurotoxins. Tasty. The other one is eating organic or traditionally farmed produce. I understand that organic is not an option for everybody, but getting a list on the Dirty Dozen and Clean 15, so that's a list of the most sprayed and least sprayed types of fruits and vegetables at a conventional grocery store, is really, really handy to decrease your exposure to herbicides and pesticides, which, as we know, can cause all types of issues. So supplements. Supplements it's a tool, okay? It's not the foundation The foundation is diet. The foundation is change in habits. But supplements can be super, super helpful. And these are 3 super helpful supplements for gut issues, gut dysbiosis, microbial issues. First and foremost, probiotics to help restore the balance and integrity of your gut health. In my opinion, HMF lines, human microflora or human multiflora, are the best because they are sourced from human microbiome. So these are strains that live in your gut. Whereas my second choice would be things coming from cattle, so the bovine based. My opinion is that we're not cows, so we don't need cow microflora in ours. So just that one. L-glutamine. It's a tremendously helpful amino acid. It is tremendously anti-inflammatory, and it helps to knit or helps to heal soft tissues and mucosal membranes. Also, omega-3 fatty acids helps with digestion, helps with mucosal repair, and is anti-inflammatory. What you'll see across the board with gut issues is going to be inflammation and tissue damage on that V-leaf, okay? And there are a lot more supplements that I would recommend, but these are my top 3 for this particular issue.